Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1455. The topic is Q&A, and the title is The Best Technique People Don't Use. So this was a listener request. They actually asked me, they had listened to a couple podcasts and said that I had, they were podcasts about muscle building. And they said there was a lot of techniques I talked about, like rest, pause, drop sets, and other odds and ends. And they essentially wanted to know, if there was a best technique that I thought people didn't use, so that way they could use it. So basically, it's like boiling it down and saying, where's the best place that I should start? So, in the typical fashion I have more than one answer because there's all these different training goals, and some people want more than just muscle building, or they don't want muscle building. So, the answers for muscle building, I have an answer. I have an answer for strength, and I have an answer for fat loss. So, if your goals are any of those, the best and top technique that I think people aren't using enough when it comes to muscle building is the use of pre-exhaust. Now, we have podcast 1160. It's a training podcast titled Using Pre-Exhaust to Change Exercise Focus. This is by far a technique people do not do often enough. It has enormous amounts of benefits. What it is basically performing an isolation exercise before a compound exercise. An isolation exercise is an exercise that targets just one muscle. A compound exercise is an exercise that targets multiple muscles. So you can think about a leg extension isolates the quadriceps, but a barbell squat uses the quadriceps but also the hamstrings, the glutes. You're limited by ab strength, lower back strength, even upper body positioning. If you can get your arms rotated back onto the bar with a proper upper back stabilization. So there's basically a full body involvement in a squat, whereas in a leg extension, it's just your quadriceps. So the reason why I feel like people need to use this more is it has just enormous benefits. And I do it all the time. It's allowed me to gain a lot of size. So I started lifting when I was 165 pounds, very skinny fat. I went through 2.5 years of being anorexic. So I went from 16 years old when I started lifting weights. I actually started doing push-ups and sit-ups at 15, but I started lifting weights at 16 all the way to about 18 and a half-ish. I ate like nothing, like one meal a day, and tried to burn those calories off. Horrible. So I just got skinnier and fatter because I lost all the muscle tissue, whatever I would have had. So it was just horrendous. But at 18 years old, I was 165 pounds, no muscle definition anywhere. You could grab fat rolls around my belly. And I'm now 283 pounds as of this morning, and you can see the outline of my abs. So, added a lot of weight, over 100 pounds of muscle tissue. And one of the techniques I've used all the time is pre-exhaust. Now, what I'll do is for me, one of the biggest things is chest flies before any kind of chest presses. I have very short upper arms, which means that when I do any kind of press, my triceps are very dominant. So I have to do a lot of chest isolation, otherwise my triceps take over and do most of the work for my pressing movements. So I'll do a lot of chest flies. I'll often do 2 or 3 variations of chest flies before I even do a single press when I'm doing a chest workout. But one of the main benefits is less connective tissue damage. So by isolating a singular muscle, so by wearing out my chest before I do anything, it then limits how heavy I can go on the bigger compound movements. So if I do a bunch of leg extensions and then go squat, I won't be able to squat as much as I normally would. The benefit of that is you still get maximal muscle tissue damage, but you get less connective tissue damage. Therefore, you can train at a higher frequency, which allows you to increase your overall volume, and you can improve your quality per set and actually get bigger growth. So you can get actually more growth in, say, a weekly span by doing pre-exhaust than you can without it. So it allows you better training volume, better training quality, more muscle damage, less tissue damage. You can train more often, all the good stuff. Also, it encourages the targeted muscle to be the weakest link in the compound movement. So if I want to do squats to wear out my quadriceps, well, if I have very strong hamstrings and glutes, then I have to squat to the point of my hamstrings and glutes being so fatigued that it then maximally recruits my quadriceps. So that means I have to destroy and wear out my hamstrings and glutes before I can get to my quads. So doing variation, there's variable techniques to pre-exhaust. There's tons of ways to set it up. But using pre-exhaust, you can pre-fatigue specific muscles going into the bigger compound movement, so then you get more wear and tear out of the targeted muscle. So that's extremely helpful. And it can allow for more specific targeting through the same exact exercise. So for example, I can use leg press to be a quad movement, or I can use leg press to be a hamstring movement, depending on what I do before I do leg press. So it allows for a lot more training variety, and it allows for a lot more variety of usage out of the equipment that I have available. So if you have limited equipment, by using pre-exhaust with different different setups and structures, you can actually get a lot more training variety out of the equipment you have. So a lot of the clients I work with, like online, they train at home gyms. So they have limited equipment, considering like the comparable to like a commercial gym. Well, that doesn't mean they're going to limit their progress. We just do a lot of different techniques. Sometimes I do pre-exhaust, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll pre-exhaust what would be considered like a non-targeted muscle to then maximally load the target muscle, or I'll pre-exhaust the target muscle, so then it negatively impacts the entire movement in the sense of strength, and then they get maximal recruitment out of that targeted muscle. So there's a lot of ways to set it up, and you can just use the exact same equipment, but you can set it up in so many unique ways. So it's very fun. By far, for muscle building, muscle growth, pre-exhaust is the best technique that most people don't use. So again, if you want to learn about that, that's podcast 1160. For strength, the best technique most people don't use is a proper warm-up. We actually just talked about this 4 podcasts ago. The last Q&A podcast, it was podcast 1451 Q&A titled, Should You Stretch Before a Workout? The answer is hell yes. And in that podcast, I explain how to do that, where it doesn't take up a bunch of time and you don't annoy things or do all the wrong stuff or double up on things and waste time or energy. So podcast 1451 will explain more. But proper warm-up, when you do that correctly, the way that I like to structure them, you address shoulder mechanics, mobility, and strength, and that includes your thoracic spine, which is necessary for strength and positioning for all lifts. Now, arguably, you could say that it's not as important for deadlift. However, it is, but it is more important for squats and bench. But deadlift, it's still helpful to have proper shoulder mechanics, so that way you have the proper kind of like thoracic positioning to be loaded over top of the bar, to where you're not head out over in front, shoulders out in front, and your thoracic spine is so rounded that your lats can't hold the position and it starts to round your lower back even faster. So thoracic spine positioning does help the deadlift. Now, especially if you do double overhand like hook grip, and if you do like a sumo position rather than a conventional, you have to be even more strict in your thoracic positioning. But a proper warm-up addresses shoulders, core, and hips. So it helps strengthen the core for whatever your purposes might be. So the warm-ups are always different depending on whatever client I'm working with and what their goals are. And then hip, we work on hip mobility and hip strength. And all 3 of those areas, shoulders, core, and hips, are included, and they're important for any strength lift you can think of. Anything over your head, 100%, all 3 of these are in place. Even things you're just picking up off the ground, like a deadlift, still all 3 of these things are in place. So it improves movement mechanics when you do a proper warm-up. It'll help you just move more efficiently with less restriction. So you'll actually increase your performance, and it'll decrease wear and tear on connective tissues and joints. So you actually increase injury prevention. It also addresses weaknesses that limit large lifts but aren't often built well through the large lifts. So if I have a weak core and that's causing me to lose positioning in my deadlift, just deadlifting more and more and more and more doesn't necessarily strengthen the core the best way, because you annihilate a bunch of other things in the process. So isolating out the core work as part of your warm-up helps you work on addressing the core, and then as you go do the big lifts, you'll get some additional benefit as well. And it improves recovery when you do a proper warm-up. Like if I do like powerlifters, if they do 4 workouts in a week, say it's squat, bench, deadlift, then overhead press or bench accessory. Every day, all 4 of those, they're doing a proper warm-up that includes shoulders, core, and hips. So it improves recovery because you're loosening stiff muscles around joints, you're increasing blood flow, which is going to bring in new proteins to help heal the tissues. There's a lot of benefit for recovery-wise with a proper warm-up. So to learn more about that, like we said, was podcast 1451. So the best technique most people don't use for strength is a proper warm-up. Now, moving on to the last one, the best technique most people don't use for fat loss is weight training circuits. Stop doing cardio, like just going and running on a treadmill or walking on a step mill too often. Like most of my clients do 20 minutes or less of cardio, and actually most of my clients don't even do any cardio. It's just the ones that we have to include cardio in based on their goals, their schedule, and what their demands and needs are. When we do add cardio, we tend not to add in more than 20 minutes at a time. I've helped people earn aesthetic pro cards, both drug tested and non-tested, and they never did more than 20 minutes of cardio at a time. Yeah, that's amazing. So most people are like, oh, you got to do an hour of fasted cardio in the morning. Horrible idea. Horrible idea. There's so much research, so much has been learned about that process and what the body goes through when you do fasted cardio, that it's without a doubt a horrible idea. Horrible. So, one of the better ways to train your body when you're doing fat loss is to focus on weight training circuits. In podcast 181, so way the hell back when, podcast 181 is a training podcast titled Using Muscle Damage for Fat Loss. If you have trouble going back that far, you can just Google search Podbean, 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 Brutal Iron Gym. It'll take you to our Podbean Brutal Iron Gym homepage on the website. And if you're on a laptop, it's on the right side of your screen. In the middle of the screen, there's a search function. If you're on your mobile phone, just scroll all the way towards the bottom, and there'll be this search feature after the last podcast that's shown on the first page of podcasts. And in that, you can just type in using muscle damage for fat loss, and the podcast will show up. I'm in the process of trying to update my website, so I'll have all the search functions and features on there. It's going. It just takes time. But eventually we'll make it easier for you guys to find older podcasts. If you like the idea of that being on our website, please email me to help motivate me to keep doing this, because it's an annoying process. But I love it, and I think it's going to benefit a lot of people, so I'm still going to do it. Okay. But if your goal is fat loss, by far the best technique most people don't use is weight training circuits. It helps you burn all the calories that you would normally do from the cardio, but you're getting all the muscle damage effect. Muscle damage helps actually burn more total calories, like stored body fat, over the recovery period of the muscles than you ever would have burned during the actual cardio session. So if you do an hour of cardio and say, I burned 1,000 calories, congratulations, but that's minimal compared to, that's not significant, I guess, compared to how many calories you would burn if you were doing weight training circuits that cause muscle damage, and then your body had to take the next 24 hours to heal and repair those muscles. You'll burn, as a net, more total calories, and you'll look a lot better. You're actually getting muscle shape while improving fat loss. A lot of people, when they say they want to lose fat to see their muscles, they don't have any damn muscles to see. They've never actually taken the time to build any muscles. So a lot of times I'll run into men, I want to lose this fat on my belly so I can see my abs. You never built your abs. A lot of women, I want to lose the fat on my backside so I can have a nice bubble butt. You don't have any muscle to make a bubble butt. You have no butt. You're going to go from a fat butt to no butt. Pancake. So we got to build that stuff. And that's where weight training circuits are incredibly valuable, because you're building the muscle in the shape as you're losing the fat. You're doing both at one time. And the workouts are much shorter. You can do a workout in 30 to 40 minutes and get way more benefit than you would have from 60 minutes on a step meal. So really awesome technique that most people don't use. Okay? So that's my one answer, which was multiple answers, is if your goal is muscle building, the best technique that you might not be using is pre-exhaust. Check out podcast 1160. If your goal is strength, the best technique you might not be using is a proper warm-up. check out podcast 1451. If your goal is fat loss, the best technique you might not be using is weight training circuits. So check out podcast 181. Awesome. Well, thank you, listener, for the question. I love questions. So please, everyone, always send in questions. I hope that I always answer your emails. I try to get back to everybody's email in a week. I've been pretty good at that. I don't know of anybody right now who I haven't answered back in a week. So thank you for everybody who sends in emails. And I love the request for topics. The whole point of the podcast is just be able to help everyone live a healthier and happier life and to answer questions you have. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this was really helpful. If you like our podcast, please consider sharing it. The more people we share the podcast with, the more people we can help. That's the whole point of the podcast. And then also thank you to those who donate to support the podcast. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year for hosting costs. I give an hour to it every day, and we want to keep it for free. So thank you to the donations that help cover some of the cost. I really appreciate that. You can donate on our website at www.brutalirongym.com. There's an option there for a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation, even $5 a month, whatever you can give, it does add up. So thank you very much. Also, if you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.